Two Toronto Raptors rivals are preying on the team's downfall in hopes of landing one of our top stars, as both the New York Knicks as well as Philadelphia 76ers have had reports come out how they're interested in either OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam, specifically at this year's trade deadline. So we're going to break down why these rumors have percolated, why these reports are coming out, and whether or not the Raptors will actually have to make this decision, as things have been on a little tiny bit of an upswing, at least in the last couple games. Going to be a fun test against the Boston Celtics tomorrow, but we have lots of stuff to dive into because this entire summer, we've talked about how the Toronto Raptors have big decisions to make, given the fact that Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby and Gary Trent Jr., if you want to throw his name into the mix, are all potentially unrestricted free agents come next summer. And if the Raptors, want to dip into the cap, dip into the luxury tax, might even get hard capped, honestly, but given how big the contracts could be for both OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam, they potentially could. But given the team didn't make the playoffs last year, we did lose our first couple games of the season, or we won the first one and then we're on a little bit of a drought, right? The unpredictability of how well this roster will perform could make Masai Ujiri skeptical on whether or not to hand out big money. And basically, other teams are hoping to swoop in and say, hey, Masai, Toronto Raptors, you are potentially going to lose at least one of OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam free agency, so just trade him at the deadline. Look at what happened with Fred VanVleet. Sure, the values, sure, the dealings that you were getting offered for Fred weren't that great, but he ended up leaving for nothing, and obviously we got the cap space. We ended up bringing in Dennis Schroeder, so, depending on how you want to look at it, I've brought that up consistently over the vids over the last few months, and people have said there is an alternative view on it, but I digress. We could have gotten some value back via trade for Fred VanVleet. And if we're going to let OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam walk this summer, if the writing's on the wall, if the team's sort of going to be in a position to not be able to bring one of those guys back, you may as well make a trade. And this is where the Philadelphia 76ers and New York Knicks sort of jump in, as we'll take a look at the Sixers report that came out first, basically from Liberty.com, saying that if the Raptors' slow start to the season continues into 2024, which when Marcus Morris Sr., Nicholas Batum, Robert Covington, as well as Kenyon Martin Jr. all can have their contracts aggregated in a trade. Obviously, that's the haul that the Philadelphia 76ers received in return for James Harden. Then Daryl Morey figures he could play some calls to Masai Ujiri at the deadline. Although Ujiri drives a hard bargain, as we all know, Morey can leverage the Sixers cap outlook to his advantage in negotiations, saying that the Sixers could effectively say to the Toronto Raptors, you can trade us OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam ahead of the trade deadline and ensure you get something in return for them. Or you can stand pat and we'll sign them in free agency if you lose them for nothing. Your choice. So that's an interesting perspective. That's an interesting sort of trade negotiation for everything I mentioned, right? The unrestricted free agency of those two top stars, where the Raptors could go. Sixers reporters basically coming in and saying that Daryl Morey will leverage that against the Toronto Raptors because there's a lot of contracts off the books for Philadelphia. Tobias Harris, who had that monolith of a deal, that's coming off the books. They have a couple other players that opens up some free agency, opens up some cap for the Sixers this upcoming season. So they could swoop in and say, hey, OG Anunoby, hey, Pascal Siakam, come here, we'll give you your bag, play under your former head coach, and give you a chance to win a championship. Because, I don't know, I'm skeptical of the Sixers as always come playoff time, but they have looked really good to start off this year under Nick Nurse, under, James Harden. James Harden gone, Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid playing really well to start off the season. Adding that third star in there could be appealing to an unrestricted free agent like OG or Pascal, right? They're saying, given the cap space and all that, we'll take him in the offseason, or, hey, trade him for us at the deadline. And this is where things get pesky. This is where things get interesting for the Toronto Raptors, because depending on how we do, because I could see a world where the Raptors actually look really good and it makes sense to pay all the guys and figure out the cap situation in the future. I see a world where that could happen, but I also definitely see a world where we are just as much of a roller coaster as we've been over the first couple weeks of the season. I mean, tomorrow's test against Boston is going to be very big in terms of pegging where the Toronto Raptors are against the team's elite, the NBA's elite, but I don't know. The Raptors, I've been of the position, hey, OG Anunoby, we know, is not going to sign an extension. The max extension he's available to receive from the Toronto Raptors right now is below probably his open market value. So he's not going to sign a contract extension right now. However, Pascal Siakam, he's eligible for a max. The Raptors can sign him. He's probably pushing to make an All-NBA team. I know he had a first few games of the season, but has been on an upward trajectory as of late. Again, there's all that confusion. I'd say sign him, and then I know a lot of people want to trade him. I know a lot of people want to deal away Pascal, but if we have Pascal Siakam under control for 4 or 5 seasons, and then we deal him at next deadline and things are a little bit weird, we're still a mid-level team, we could get so much more value back for a Pascal Siakam or a team that he's going to controls his rights. He's not a flight risk. He's not a guy that could potentially leave in free agency. If we have him under contract, it increases his trade value, and then if we're actually good, if we are performing at an elite level, we're not risking him getting a supermax deal in terms of being an all-NBA guy and things along those lines, and we have his rights. We have him under control. So, personally, I'd just give him the max contract, I'd say, and then figure it out. But that's just me. I know a lot of people are down on Pascal Siakam. It is what it is. I made a little rant video saying put some respect on his name, but let me know your perspective along those lines. We still have a wait-and-see approach with OG, given the fact he's not going to sign a contract extension given his open market value. But that also leads us to the New York Knicks, as Jeff Schwartz came out and had an interesting quote, basically talking about in the context of the article that Emmanuel Quickley for an O.G. Anunoby trade would make a heck ton sense. So it would be a great deal for both sides. He came out and basically said this, that Quickley would make a huge difference for this Raptors offense with his speed, bounce, and ability to shoot from all over the floor, Schwartz writes. And the Knicks were reportedly interested in O.G. Anunoby last season. They can insert him into a big starting lineup of Jalen Brunson, R.J. Barrett, Julius Randle, and Mitchell Robinson. New York also moves on from Fournier, which would be the best for all parties at this point. So Jeff Schwartz in this one is pitching O.G. Anunoby going to the New York Knicks for Emmanuel Quickley, who is good. Don't get me wrong. Quickley is a guy that was a 6th Man of the Year candidate, all that type of stuff. Quick, fast, quick is in the name and all that stuff, but knocks down threes. He's a really legit backup point guard, fringe, sort of the level of Dennis Schroeder, maybe a little bit below considering what Dennis Schroeder's been able to provide for the Toronto Raptors this season, but Quickley, again, fits the Scotty Barnes line, would be a nice piece coming back. But for OG Anunoby, and I get the flight risk stuff, I get the lack of control in his rights, but I don't know. I wouldn't feel right. I wouldn't feel good about Quickley coming back in a package for OG, and frankly, in the world where I see all of the reports, everything that's come out regarding Masai Ujiri's handling of OG Anunoby, his contract stuff, trade negotiations, and things along those lines, Damian Lillard in that package, when they were in negotiations to acquire Dame, OG Anunoby was made untouchable for Damian Lillard. You're telling me that Masai Ujiri's going to flip a switch, change his mind, come to the trade deadline, and say, hey, we wouldn't trade him for Damian Lillard, but you know who we'll trade him for? Emmanuel Quickley? No. No way, Jose Calderon. That is not happening in any planet, in any world. So don't get your hopes up, Knicks fans. Folks, Chris and Dariel down over at Knicks Digest, they're getting hyped up, thinking about landing OG Anunoby. It's not going to happen, but let me know what you guys think. If you think the Raptors should make these deals, I think the consensus is that a lot of Raptors fans don't want to deal away OG. Personally, I'm not of the mindset to deal away Pascal. I think extend Pascal, give OG his contract, dip in the luxury tax, even if it's an issue right now, and then make some trades in the future if we have to deal with our cap. These guys aren't going to be bad enough to where they're negative, their liabilities, there's things along those lines that they're big contract deals. So that's just my perspective. In fact, they get that more valuable the more that other teams have the control of them when they acquire them. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. You guys are the best to rank this far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.